At her company's holiday party, Jessica introduced the man who had given her his love, his loyalty, and his years, not as her husband, but as just a friend. In that single moment, she turned her marriage into a stranger's story. Johnson didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't cause a scene. But what he chose to do next was far more devastating than anger. Viewers, let me ask you directly. If you were standing in his shoes, in the middle of a crowded dinner party, and your spouse pretended you were nothing more than a casual friend, what would you do? Would you laugh it off, walk away, or return the favor in the most devastating way possible? Think carefully, because this story isn't just about names. It's about betrayal, pride, and the painful cost of wanting freedom when you already have love. Jessica Matthews walked into her company's end-of-the-year dinner like a queen entering her palace. The downtown Manhattan venue sparkled with chandeliers, soft jazz filled the air, and everyone was dressed to impress. For most, this was a night of celebration. But for Jessica, it was something else entirely, a stage. She had worked tirelessly at her marketing firm, climbing higher every year, and tonight she wanted eyes on her. Not just for her accomplishments, but for her allure. Beside her stood Johnson, her husband of 4 years. Tall, steady, the kind of man whose presence drew respect without trying. He wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, and that was exactly why Jessica sometimes felt invisible next to him. She loved him, or at least she used to. But tonight, she wanted something different. A taste of single life, even if only for a few hours. So when her colleagues gathered, and the laughter flowed, Jessica did the unthinkable. She placed a manicured hand on Johnson's arm, smiled at her friends, and said, "This is my friend Johnson." Friend, not husband, not partner, just friend. The words sliced through Johnson like glass. He smiled faintly, controlled, but inside, something burned. He had given her everything: patience, loyalty, stability. And yet in front of her glittering peers, he was reduced to a nameless accessory. The evening dragged on, each introduction a new stab. Every time she called him just a friend, the weight of humiliation pressed harder. And yet Johnson didn't lash out. He didn't make a scene. Instead, his silence grew louder, his composure sharper, until Jessica noticed that unsettling calm in his eyes. Then, his chance arrived. A group of his own acquaintances, business partners she hadn't met before, approached. With the same steady voice, Johnson gestured to Jessica and said, "This is Jessica, my ex." The room shifted. Jessica froze, laughter from her colleagues dissolving into uneasy glances. Her heart pounded. Ex? Why would he say that? She tried to brush it off with a laugh, but the calmness in Johnson's tone gnawed at her. He wasn't joking. He wasn't angry. He was making a statement, one she couldn't quite understand yet. And for the first time in years, Jessica felt a flicker of fear. For a split second, the laughter in the hall dimmed, replaced by whispers. Glasses clinked nervously, and the music seemed to fade into the background. Jessica forced a smile, but her cheeks burned under the weight of curious stares. "Your ex?" One of her colleagues, Megan, raised her eyebrows. "Oh, I had no idea you two." Johnson cut in smoothly. "Yes, it's been quite a journey, but you know how life works. Sometimes you think you're building forever, then realize forever already ended." His tone was calm, but every word dripped with precision like a surgeon making deliberate incisions. Jessica's throat tightened. She wanted to interrupt, to laugh it off, but pride held her back. She couldn't look rattled in front of her team, so she chuckled lightly, pretending it was a silly inside joke. Yet the unease in the room lingered, hanging like smoke no one could ignore. As the evening rolled on, Jessica tried to reclaim control. She pulled her colleagues aside, telling stories about a successful campaign she led, forcing the spotlight back on her. But no matter how loud her laughter or dazzling her smile, her mind kept replaying Johnson's words. My ex. What did he mean by that? Was it a warning? A punishment? Or worse, did he mean it? Across the room, Johnson blended easily into conversations with her company executives. He was polite, engaging, even charming, something Jessica rarely saw in him at home. They leaned in when he spoke, genuinely listening, and when one of them asked about Jessica, he smiled faintly and said, "Jessica is remarkable, strong, ambitious, the kind of woman who always gets what she wants, even if it means losing something else." The comment landed like a slap, though it was wrapped in velvet. Jessica excused herself, stepping out onto the balcony for air. The cold night breeze slapped her face, but it couldn't clear the storm in her chest. She felt exposed, fragile, even though moments ago she had been basking in admiration. Why did he flip the script so easily? Why did it sting so much when she had been the one to start this game? The door opened behind her. Johnson walked out, his calm footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. For a moment, they stood in silence, city lights flickering in the distance. "Why are you doing this?" Jessica asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Johnson's eyes met hers, steady, unreadable. "I'm not doing anything, Jessica. You wanted to be single tonight. I'm simply giving you what you asked for." Her heart dropped. The words were so simple, so logical, yet they cut deeper than any shouting match could have. She wanted to respond, to reclaim her power, but nothing came. Instead, she just stood there, trembling, not from the cold, but from the realization that her husband had just drawn a line she wasn't sure she could erase. Inside, the music picked up again. The party went on. But for Jessica, the night had already shifted into something else entirely. Something dangerous. The next morning, sunlight spilled into their Manhattan apartment, bouncing off the glass windows and filling the space with an almost cruel brightness. Jessica stirred awake, her head still buzzing from too much champagne and the weight of last night's events. She rolled over, expecting Johnson to be asleep beside her, but his side of the bed was empty, sheets already cold. The scent of coffee drifted in from the kitchen, mixed with the faint sound of pages turning. Pulling on her robe, Jessica padded out to find him sitting at the table, coffee mug in one hand, a book in the other. He didn't look up when she entered. "Morning," she said carefully. "Morning," he replied, voice calm, unreadable. He turned another page. Jessica forced a laugh. "Last night was interesting." Was it? His tone was flat, as though the evening had been any other Thursday night. She sat across from him, studying his face. Johnson had always been composed, but there was something different now, an absence of warmth, a chilling steadiness. It unsettled her more than anger ever could. "Come on, don't tell me you're really upset about that." She reached for his hand, but he pulled it back casually as if it had been an accident. Jessica stiffened. "I was just trying to have fun. Everyone knows how stressful this job is. I wanted to feel free for a night. That's all." Finally, Johnson closed the book and looked at her. His eyes were sharp, cutting through her excuses. "Free?" he repeated softly. "Is that what marriage feels like to you? A prison?" Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected him to phrase it like that. "Don't twist my words, sometimes I want to feel desirable, not just someone's wife." His expression didn't change. "So you stripped me of my place in your life to impress strangers?" The accusation stung, even though he spoke it calmly. Jessica pushed back her chair, irritation bubbling beneath her skin. "You're overreacting. It was one night. You can't seriously be holding a grudge over a word." Johnson stood, rinsed his coffee mug, and placed it neatly in the sink. "You're right, Jessica. It was just one night." He dried his hands with a towel. "But sometimes one night shows you more truth than 4 years of marriage." Her breath caught. "What's that supposed to mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his jacket from the chair, slipped his phone into his pocket, and said, "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Jessica alone in the glowing kitchen. For the first time in their marriage, she felt the hollow chill of his absence, Not just physical, but emotional. She told herself he was bluffing, that this was just his way of making her feel guilty. But as she sat in silence, every second ticking louder on the clock, a knot formed in her chest. Because deep down, she knew Johnson's silence was more dangerous than any outburst. It wasn't just hurt, it was distance. And distance, once it grows, rarely comes back. Over the next week, Jessica began to notice changes. Small at first, almost unnoticeable, until they stacked up into something she couldn't ignore. Johnson no longer called her during his lunch breaks. He no longer lingered in the evenings, asking about her day, listening to her endless office dramas. Instead, he came home late, often after she was already in bed, smelling faintly of coffee and long hours at the firm. And when he did slide under the covers, there was a new space between them, wide enough to fit an ocean. At first, Jessica chalked it up to his work. "Big case?" she asked one night, trying to sound casual. "Something like that," he murmured, eyes glued to his phone. But she knew better. Johnson was a lawyer, yes, but his discipline never used to steal him away like this. He was the man who once left court early, just to make it to her birthday dinner. The man who surprised her with late-night milkshakes because she once said it reminded her of her childhood. That man was slipping further and further away, and the silence between them was deafening. Jessica tried to reclaim her control the way she always did, with charm. She cooked his favorite meal one evening, grilled salmon with roasted potatoes the way he liked it. She wore the red silk dress he'd bought her on their first anniversary. She greeted him at the door with a smile, hoping to spark some flicker of the old intimacy. But Johnson only nodded, his expression unreadable. He sat at the table, ate quietly, complimented the seasoning, and then excused himself to finish a brief. The rejection cut deep. Jessica sat alone in the dining room, staring at the half-empty wine glass in her hand. For the first time, doubt began to gnaw at her pride. Had she pushed him too far? Had her attempt at feeling desirable backfired so badly that she had made herself disposable? The next day at work, her colleagues still buzzed about the dinner party. Megan pulled her aside in the break room, whispering with that tone of gossip dressed as concern. "Jess, I didn't know you and Johnson were separated," she said. Jessica's heart sank. "We're not," she snapped. "He was just joking." Megan frowned. It didn't sound like a joke, and honestly, the way he carried himself, he seemed done. The words echoed long after Megan left. Done. The word she had thrown around casually in arguments, never believing it could be real. That night, Jessica confronted Johnson, her voice sharp with desperation. "People think we're over. Do you know how humiliating that is?" He looked at her calm as ever. "You wanted to be single for a night, Jessica. This is just the ripple of your choice." Her throat tightened. "So what? You're punishing me?" "No," he said simply, standing from the couch. "I'm just learning what life feels like when I stop fighting for someone who doesn't want to be fought for." And with that, he walked into the bedroom, leaving her trembling in the living room, the TV flickering images she couldn't see. For the first time, Jessica wasn't worried about appearances. She was worried about losing him. By the second week, Jessica could no longer ignore it. Johnson was slipping away. The once steady man who filled their home with warmth now moved like a guest passing through. He answered questions with short replies, spent his evenings in his office instead of beside her, and his laughter, the sound she once loved, had all but disappeared. For Jessica, panic began to creep beneath her polished surface. She had always been the one in control, the one people admired. At work, she commanded attention. Among her friends, she was the star. And in their marriage, she believed Johnson would always be the patient anchor, no matter what storm she stirred. But now, he wasn't chasing her. He wasn't begging. He was letting go. So Jessica did what she thought would fix everything. She tried harder. She started leaving little notes in his briefcase, reminders of their memories. "Remember Paris? Our first trip together. You said forever." She sent him flirty texts during the day, the kind she hadn't written in years. She even planned a surprise date, reservations at his favorite steakhouse, complete with the wine he always ordered. That Friday night, she dressed to perfection. When Johnson walked through the door, tired but composed, she greeted him with a bright smile. Dinner, just us. No work, no distractions. He paused, studying her carefully, then nodded. All right. At the restaurant, she leaned in across the candlelit table, her voice softer, almost pleading. I miss us, Johnson. Don't you? For a long moment, he said nothing. He just swirled his glass of wine, eyes distant. Finally, he looked up. I miss the version of us that was real, the version where I was your husband, not your accessory, not your inconvenience. Her heart lurched. That's not fair. You know I love you. Do you? His voice was calm, but the question hit harder than a scream. Because when you introduced me as just a friend, I realized something. Maybe that's how you've always seen me, someone safe, someone steady, someone who doesn't matter enough to claim publicly. Jessica's throat tightened. I was careless. I wanted to feel desirable for one night. I wasn't thinking. Johnson's gaze didn't waver. No, Jessica. You were thinking. That's the problem. The rest of dinner passed in silence, the clink of silverware louder than any conversation. By the time they returned home, Jessica felt the weight of defeat pressing against her chest. That night, she reached for him in bed, desperate for a touch that could bridge the gap. But Johnson shifted away gently, his back turned to her. Good night, Jessica. Her eyes burned as she stared at the ceiling, fighting the tears she swore she'd never let him see. For the first time since the dinner party, the thought struck her like lightning. What if he wasn't bluffing? What if she really lost him? And worse, what if he was happier without her? The following week, Jessica felt like she was walking on thin glass. Every sound in the apartment seemed louder, every silence heavier. She watched Johnson carefully, hoping for cracks in his cold exterior, some sign that he was softening. But if anything, his calmness had only grown. One evening, he came home earlier than usual. Jessica's heart leapt at the sound of the door. She had lit candles, cooked dinner again, and even pulled out their wedding album, placing it on the coffee table as a reminder of their vows. Johnson, she greeted, forcing a hopeful smile. I thought maybe we could... But he didn't sit. He didn't even take off his coat. Instead, he stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. Jessica, he said quietly, we need to talk. Her pulse quickened. Those words, we need to talk, had always been a prelude to fights with colleagues or arguments with friends. But from Johnson, they sounded like a verdict. I filed for separation. The air left her lungs. What? I spoke with an attorney this morning. The papers will be ready soon. Her voice cracked. Johnson, no. You can't just... I can, he interrupted gently. And I have. Jessica stumbled back a step, gripping the edge of the table for support. Why would you do this? Over one mistake? Over one stupid night? He shook his head. It wasn't just one night, Jessica. That dinner party was only the moment that revealed the truth. When you called me a friend, I realized that in your heart, I already was. You stopped seeing me as your husband long before that. Tears welled in her eyes, but her pride fought them back. You're twisting everything. You've always been my husband. I wanted to feel something different. That doesn't mean I don't love you. Johnson's face softened for the first time in weeks, but his words stayed steady. Maybe you did love me once, but love isn't supposed to humiliate. It isn't supposed to hide. And it isn't supposed to make one person feel invisible. Jessica's hands trembled as she reached for him. Don't do this. Please, Johnson, we can fix it. I'll change. He gently pulled away. You don't understand. This isn't about punishment. This is about clarity. That night showed me something I can't unsee. You wanted to be free. And maybe I need to let you be. Her tears finally broke free, streaking down her cheeks. For the first time in years, Jessica felt truly powerless. She had built her world on control, on appearances, on pride. And now, all of it was slipping away. "Johnson, please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't walk away from us." He looked at her for a long moment, pain flickering in his eyes. Then he said, softly but firmly, "I'm not walking away, Jessica. You already did. I'm just catching up." And with that, he turned and walked into the bedroom, leaving Jessica collapsed on the couch, her sobs echoing through the silent apartment. Jessica barely slept that night. She lay curled on the couch, staring at the ceiling as shadows shifted across the room. The word separation replayed in her head like a broken record, slicing deeper each time. By morning, her eyes were swollen, her body heavy with exhaustion. She stumbled into the kitchen, half expecting to see Johnson sitting with his coffee, as he always did. But the chair was empty. His mug was gone. And so was he. For the first time in 4 years, the apartment felt less like home and more like a museum. Silent, cold, full of memories she could touch but not hold. Jessica sank into a chair, her mind dragging her backward. She saw herself on their wedding day, standing under a canopy of white roses, Johnson's eyes locked on hers. He wasn't flashy, wasn't dramatic, but his vows had been steady, heartfelt. "I promise to always be your anchor, even when the waves are too strong." She remembered how safe those words had made her feel, how certain she'd been that their love could weather anything. Then came Paris, their first trip together. They had gotten lost in a maze of cobblestone streets, laughing until their sides ached. Johnson had kissed her in front of the Eiffel Tower, ignoring the crowd, whispering, "This is forever, Jess." She pressed her hands to her face, tears spilling hot and bitter. How had she let that kind of love turn into this? The more she thought about it, the more the cracks in her pride began to widen. She had always told herself Johnson would never leave, that his loyalty was unshakable. And because of that, she had taken liberties, treating him as though he'd always be waiting no matter how deeply she cut. But now, he wasn't waiting. He was walking away. Desperation clawed at her chest. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed his number. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Johnson, please. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I'll do better. Just don't give up on us. Please." She hung up, staring at the phone like it held her fate. When no call came back, she threw it onto the couch, collapsing beside it in sobs that shook her entire body. Hours passed. She tried calling again, texting, sending long messages that mixed apologies with pleas. Still, no response. By evening, Jessica found herself standing in front of their wedding album again. She flipped through the pages slowly, fingers tracing over smiling faces, moments frozen in time. Every picture was a dagger, reminding her of the life she had once held in her hands and treated carelessly. Her chest tightened with a thought so terrifying it nearly stopped her breath. What if it's already too late? What if the man I humiliated is the man I can never get back? And for the first time, Jessica felt the full weight of regret, not just as a fleeting emotion, but as a permanent shadow she might never escape. It was a Saturday evening when Jessica finally gathered the courage to confront him in person. Johnson had been staying at a small apartment near his office, something she had discovered only after calling his secretary under the pretense of dropping off files. The moment she learned his address, she knew she couldn't let another day pass in silence. She stood outside the building, her hands trembling as she rang the buzzer. For a moment, she prayed he wouldn't answer. But then his voice crackled through the intercom. "Yes? It's me," she whispered. There was a pause, then the door unlocked. When she stepped into his apartment, Jessica was struck by how minimal it was. A couch, a desk, a few books stacked neatly on a shelf. No wedding photos, no familiar scents, just distance. Johnson emerged from the kitchen, casual in a gray t-shirt, his face calm but unreadable. "Jessica." "Johnson," she said, her voice cracking. Please don't do this. He motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing, her chest heaving. I can't eat. I can't sleep. All I do is think about you, about us, about what I did that night. I was wrong. I was selfish. And I've been paying for it every second since. His expression didn't change, but his eyes softened slightly. I don't doubt that you feel regret. Regret? She snapped, her voice rising with desperation. It's more than regret. It's like losing air. Johnson, you're my husband. You're my anchor. He cut her off gently. And yet, when it mattered, I wasn't enough. Not for you. Not in front of your colleagues. Not in the moment you chose to shine. You reduced me to a friend. That wasn't a mistake, Jessica. That was the truth slipping out. Tears streamed down her face. She dropped to her knees, clutching his hands. No, that's not the truth. I was insecure. I wanted to feel seen, but I never stopped loving you. Please don't let one night erase everything we built. Johnson knelt slightly, pulling his hands free. His voice was steady, low. You're asking me to forget. But love doesn't erase humiliation. It doesn't erase the realization that I mattered less to you than the opinion of strangers. Do you understand what that does to a man? Her sobs filled the quiet apartment. I'll change. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't leave me. He stood, his shadow stretching across the room. I'm not leaving out of anger, Jessica. I'm leaving because that night opened my eyes. I've been fighting for us for years while you've been fighting for yourself. I deserve to be with someone who doesn't need to pretend I'm less than I am. Jessica stared up at him, broken, her pride shattered. So that's it? You're really walking away? His answer was calm, final. I already have. The silence after those words was louder than any argument they'd ever had. Jessica walked out of Johnson's apartment with her chest hollow, her steps unsteady against the cold Manhattan sidewalk. The city around her buzzed with its usual Saturday night rhythm. Couples laughing outside restaurants, taxis honking, neon signs flickering. But to her it all sounded muted, distant, unreal. She had always thought Heartbreak would be loud, messy, full of screaming matches and slammed doors. Instead, it was silent. Johnson's calm voice, his steady rejection, the way he closed the door on their life together without raising his voice. It was worse than anger. It was final. Back at their once shared apartment, Jessica wandered through the rooms like a ghost. Every corner mocked her. The wedding album on the coffee table, the framed photo of them at the beach, the red dress still hanging in her closet. Each item whispered a truth she could no longer run from. She hadn't lost him in one night. She had been losing him long before, piece by piece, every time she chose pride over vulnerability, appearance over honesty. Days turned into weeks. Johnson didn't return her calls. Papers arrived at her door, cold and official, with his signature at the bottom. Jessica signed them with trembling hands, knowing there was no undoing what she had done. At work, whispers followed her. Some colleagues pitied her, others judged her, but none could fix the empty chair at her dinner table. She smiled through meetings, laughed at jokes, but when she went home, silence swallowed her whole. And in that silence, Jessica learned something brutal about herself. She had mistaken admiration for love, attention for worth, and in doing so, she had thrown away the only man who had ever truly seen her. Across town, Johnson adjusted quietly to his new life. His evenings were spent reading, running, reconnecting with old friends. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't broken. In fact, for the first time in years, he felt free. Not the reckless freedom Jessica had chased, but the kind born of clarity. One night, while having dinner with a colleague, someone asked him about Jessica. Johnson's answer was simple. She taught me something important. Sometimes the person you love most will show you exactly how little they value you. And when they do, you don't fight to stay. You learn to let go. Jessica, meanwhile, sat alone in their apartment, scrolling through old photos, her pride now replaced by a loneliness she couldn't disguise. She wanted to call him, to beg one last time, but deep down she knew he had already said goodbye. And so the story ended. Not with fireworks, not with rage, but with a lesson carved into the hearts of both. For Jessica, it was the realization that pride can cost you everything. For Johnson, it was the quiet strength of knowing when to stop fighting for someone who refused to fight for you. Viewers, let me ask you, if you were in Jessica's shoes, would you have chosen pride over loyalty? And if you were Johnson, would you have stayed or would you have walked away?